Welcome to the Tyler's Place podcast, a podcast by Masons, for Masons, brought to you by the Supreme Council of the Scottish Rite, Southern Jurisdiction, Mother Supreme Council of the World. I'm Maynard Edwards, 32nd degree KCCH, a Scottish Rite Freemason. Thank you for joining us. If you want to drop us a line, podcast@scottishrite.org is the email address. And don't forget, if you like the podcast, you're going to love our YouTube channel and also our TikTok page. So check those. In fact, check out all of our socials. We've got them all, and we'd love to see you there. Excuse me, just 1 minute. Let me try something. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it's the Ringling Brothers Circus, the greatest show on earth. Sorry, I had to do that. The Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus has recently announced that after a several years hiatus, the greatest show on earth is once again going to be traveling the country, bringing circus dreams from New York to LA. They will not, however, be bringing any animal acts with them. Many years of protests, and the circus actually closed for a couple of years and now have brought the circus back without the animals, and hopefully that will appease a lot of their critics. You may not know this, but there is a big connection between the circus and Freemasonry, especially through the Ringling Brothers. They were real people, first generation German Americans. Their mother was French, their dad was German, so I guess German-French Americans, from a tiny little town in Wisconsin called Baraboo. And all 7 brothers and the family patriarch, August Ringling, were active members of Baraboo Lodge number 34 in Baraboo, Wisconsin. In fact, many of the brothers served as officers of the lodge. Here to talk with us about the Ringling Brothers themselves is historian Jerry Apps, author of Ringlingville USA, the stupendous story of 7 siblings and their stunning circus success. Say that 3 times fast. Jerry, welcome to the show. Let's just start right at the beginning of the Ringling Brothers story.
We want to go back to 1848, and that's the year that August Rungling, Rungling, August Rungling came to Milwaukee, Wisconsin. He had come from Germany, spent a year in Canada, and came from Canada to Milwaukee to ply his trade as a harness maker. Upon arriving in Wisconsin and Milwaukee, one of the first things he discovered is that his name was so German that he decided to make it Ringling, Ringling. So the first thing he did was to change his name to Ringling when he arrived here. Then in 1852, he married a woman who had come to Milwaukee from France, Salome Juliard. And they, for whatever reason, and I don't know what it is, they moved to Chicago in 1852, the year that he was married. And Al Ringling, the oldest of the boys, was born in Chicago. They moved back, for whatever reason, in 1853, back to Milwaukee. And Gus, their second son, was born in 1854. They moved around a lot in the early days. In 1855, the family moved to Little Baraboo, Wisconsin, where he worked as a harness maker.
Now, at this time in American history, late 1850s, there was a real economic recession happening. That had to have been a challenging time for the Ringling family.
He was not able to really make ends meet, and he looked for another place to be a harness maker and where he could support his family. And so in 1860, just prior to the Civil War, the family moved to McGregor, Iowa. And McGregor, Iowa is just across the Mississippi River from Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. So now they're in McGregor, Iowa. And he's working with, and by that time, of course, there was a lot of agriculture going on in the Middle West, and there was a need for a good harness maker.
Sure, everything had to be pulled by horses. So this was definitely, some security for a rather large family. So now the Ringlings are in Iowa, and according to your book, this is where they first encounter the circus.
And one of the fascinating things was, at that time, right after the Civil War, 1866, and the years just following, there were circus boats going up the Mississippi River. Almost every year, there was a circus boat They would come up the Mississippi River, and the boat would stop at all of the river towns, including McGregor, Iowa. And these little Ringling boys, they would see an elephant, for heaven's sakes, coming off of a boat. What in the world is this? They were just thunderstruck to see these animals coming off of the boat and to see the performance. Their father was enlisted to help repair some of the leather work at these various circuses. And so they would get free tickets to see the circus. And these boys were so taken with the idea of a circus. And they got their heads together, these little guys, and they decided, we are going to put on our own circus.
There's an excellent passage in your book about that first circus that they had at home. Can you recreate that for our listeners?
That very first circus that these kids put on in a barn in McGregor, Iowa. There was a parade down Main Street and over to a barn. The brothers had an outside animal show before admission to the performance. The animal show consisted of cats, dogs, several rabbits, two tiny kittens with a sign from Timbuktu, a monster bullfrog with a sign, captured at great risk from the depths of a faraway swamp from which no other frog collector had ever emerged alive. There was a crowing rooster with tail feathers colored a bright red, a bantam pullet which laid an egg while the neighbors were seeing the animals, some tadpoles swimming in a glass container. There was a white hen and a rooster, the only ones in captivity, some English sparrows imported from an unnamed Pacific island, and Mrs. Ringling's canary, the head of the great dynasty. The boys performed on swings and walked across the long beam. The dogs set up a great barking. The cats became frightened, and pandemonium seemed about to break loose when the elder Ringling boy fed them with some meat, which he was supposed to bring home for supper.
So they swiped their mother's canary and they swiped dinner to host their circus.
And that is the genesis. That experience, watching those riverboat circuses and putting on their own little show, which attracted all of the kids in the neighborhood, as you might guess, that was the genesis of the Ringling Brothers Circus.
It seems silly to us now, but there was no Netflix at that point in time. There was nothing, folks putting on these local shows seems, and I'll tell you honestly, I'm in my mid-40s. I've never seen an elephant on a riverboat. So I think, and I had never heard of Mississippi circus boats. Obviously, we've all heard of the circus train, and I think many of us have driven by the highway and seen one of the Ringling Brothers tractor trailers, or the red or the blue troop driving along, but never a boat. So that they were not circus performers themselves. And there's two things I want to ask you about. First of all, one of the things I'd heard is that Mrs. Ringling, the matriarch of the family, was in a perpetual state of pregnancy. It seemed like she was churning out another kid every couple of months. Irish twins, as they say, all the time. Is it true? 7 Ringling brothers, but did they have any sisters mixed in there?
There was one sister.
That poor girl.
In fact, along the way, they were living in Baraboo for a long time, and she married the depot agent, whose name was, if I remember correctly, Harry North, and John Ringling North was her son, who later continued the Ringling Brothers Circus.
There were 7 of the boys, but really it was 5 of them that were mainly involved in the circus, and it was the one they called Alf seems to have been the leader of the pack, as it were.
Well, Alf T was the publicist. Al was the oldest, and he really was the one that they all looked up to, and he was the glue that held everyone together. It would be like any other family of that many boys. They got along, but yeah. And when there was a dispute, Al pretty much took care of it. But now they're back in Baraboo again after the McGregor experience. And now they are enamored with the idea of performance. And their very first attempt, they themselves as performers, was to do what was called a hall show, which is very common in those days. There were hall shows in opera houses and all those sorts of places. And they decided that they could put on a hall show. And they didn't want to do that in Baraboo because they didn't want their friends to see them and be embarrassed by what they were not able to do so well. And so they took the train to Mazamani, which is a little town further to the west, to the north and west. And there they put together a hall show. And I want to read just a little bit for you of Alf T's memory of that first hall show, which was the very beginning of the idea of now a professional Ringling Brothers circus. But this is what he wrote about the hall show. It was a cold November morning when the boys left their parents' home to give their first show as professionals. A light snow had fallen during the night, and the morning air was crisp and clear. The boys loaded trunks and musical instruments and wagons, and they set out for Sauk City, where they boarded the train to Mazamani. Opening night was set for Monday, November 27th, 1882, in an opera hall in downtown Mazamani, a farming town located 35 miles west of Madison. The boys' plan was to travel far enough from Baraboo so no one would recognize them. Not at all bashful in proclaiming the virtues of their efforts, their program stated, quote, "Do not fail to see the many attractions presented by this company. See our prize-worthy and unequaled program. We had about a $13 house, but the 59 people composing the audience looked bigger to me than an audience of 15,000 under our tents today. It seems as if every individual knew our history and was aware that this was our first attempt and was ready, and if not perhaps our first offense, and was ready to guy and laugh at our efforts." It was in that 2 years later, the spring of 1884, is when the very first Ringling Circus opened in Baraboo, Wisconsin. And that's the year to remember as the beginning of the professional circus. Spring 1884 in Baraboo, Wisconsin. It was a wagon circus, meaning they had several wagons. They worked with the neighboring farmers to borrow their wagons and haul their equipment from town to town. And that's what they did for several years.
One of the hallmarks, if I'm not mistaken, is that they ran a clean show. A lot of circuses were known to be sort of seedy establishments at that point in time, and a place where, heaven forbid, you could go see a woman's ankles or maybe her bare legs if she was performing, and then this was a scandal at the time. But the Ringling's circus, and perhaps a testament to their Masonic heritage, the fact that they were Masons and family men, it was a clean show, and that was unique for them, wasn't it?
Absolutely right, because the circuses in those days were filled with crooks. They were trying to get your money one way or the other, and the Ringlings refused to do that. Another thing that the Ringlings did, and this is attributed to their mother, who was a musician. They put on a wonderful pre-show of classical music not available to many rural communities at that time. They prided themselves in the quality not only of the performance, but in introducing especially rural communities to wonderfully professional music, and as you correctly point out, a very clean, family-oriented show.
Well, you'd imagine that if they saw this as little boys, that putting on a circus, they'd want to make sure that other little boys just like them would have access to that same thrill, to be able to see those elephants and those animals. And if it's one of the seedy circuses that your mom doesn't let you go to, those little boys aren't going to be able to come and visit the circus.
Another important point is that they did not have the financial backing of some wealthy person, which was true of some of the circuses of the day. They started clearly from the bottom up. They earned every nickel, and it went into purchasing more equipment, purchasing animals, and so on. It's a wonderful story of how a family was able to work together doing good times and bad, and to succeed beyond anyone's possible belief with tickets at 25 cents or 50 cents, and bringing in, as their big top at one time would hold 20,000 people, and they would fill it.
And that's something that would move from town to town, and it wasn't a ballpark like we'd see today. There was a fixed place. These were tents that they would put up from place to place.
Well, and they would travel. It was a very difficult life. They would travel. They put on a show and then travel all night to the next place with horses now pulling their wagons through muck and through snow, well, not snow, but rain and muddy conditions. And they would get very little sleep. And then the very next day, they would put on a big circus parade in whatever town that they were in the afternoon. And then they would often put on two shows, one in the afternoon and one in the evening. And then the next day, do the whole thing all over again, day after day after day, except Sunday. They did not perform on Sunday.
Well, the family organization, they want to make sure they've got Sunday off to go to church or for Bible study or what have you.
That's right.
So were there innovations that Ringling's brought to the circus? I mean, being a clean show is obviously a bit of an innovation, probably a fairly obvious one to some businessmen. But, P.T. Barnum is credited with the 3 rings type of thing. Was there something that the Ringlings pioneered in terms of the modern circus that we might not have without their creativity? I mean, advertising, certainly. The colorful posters and things, they're synonymous with that.
A couple of things that they were known for at the time. Barnum and Bailey was known as a Cadillac circus, meaning that it went to the wealthier communities, the larger communities. The Ringling Brothers prided themselves in going to the smaller communities, the rural communities, the communities where a circus had never appeared before. They would likely show up there. So I thought that was a wonderful attitude that they had. They wanted rural people to experience some of what their urban neighbors were experiencing, because in those days, there was a tremendous difference between those, in terms of living style, those who lived in the country, those who lived in the urban areas. And they wanted to bring good music, clean acts, the opportunity to see animals that most of the kids in the country had never seen before. And to do that in a style and at a price that they could all afford.
The Ringling family maintained control of the circus, and they added other circuses under their big top, and that's how we came up with the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey circuses. And the family held control of the circus until the late 60s, when they sold their interest in that circus to Feld Entertainment, and the Feld Entertainment Group, they ran it until 2017, when The Greatest Show on Earth closed because of the ongoing protests, shrinking audiences.
Realize what was going on in the country at the time. Movies came along, television came along. Just prior to that, radio came along. And at the time that the Ringlings were first in the circus business, they were it. They were the outside entertainment that would come to the town. And so the competition from all of these other things that was going on hurt them. But then there was and continued to be to this day, an uprising against animal care. And the animal care people, and there are several groups that were involved, won the day because the Ringling Brothers just closed down what they were doing. And now, of course, as you all know, they're coming back again, but without animals.
Does that, I have to say, and I understand what the animal care people are saying, that there's some cruelty involved, but when I was a radio host, I got to the benefit of working with several circuses that came to town, and I even auditioned for Clown College once. I passed my audition. They called me for years asking me to come. I kind of did it as a bit for television and for radio, just to go and do it. And they called me for years. Hey, would you come down? We really liked your audition. To missing the animals, I think, to me is a real shame, because, as you mentioned, a lot of people don't get to see those things in person.
Well, there weren't any zoos in the early days at all, and the ability to see a zebra or a giraffe or an elephant. In fact, someone said along the way, a circus without an elephant is not a circus, which is kind of an interesting point.
I certainly understand why people are upset about the animals and the way that they can be treated, but I know that the Ringling Circus has always treated their animals very well.
Exactly. In defense of the Ringlings and their treatment of animals, and I interviewed a lot of people when I wrote this book to find out various dimensions of all of this. They treated their animals as well as they possibly could because they were valuable assets. People don't quite understand that if you have an elephant that's worth several $1,000s, you're not going to mistreat it, for heaven's sakes. It's an asset that you want to take good care of, and they tended to do that. Well, anyway, that's an argument that will go on for some time, I'm sure.
Well, and in terms of, we mentioned a few of the innovations that they brought to the circus. At what point did most living people, the circus, every circus I've ever seen has been the Ringling Brothers and Barnum and Bailey Circus, the greatest show on earth. And I probably went to several dozen iterations of it over the years. I saw when they had a unicorn, which near as I could tell was a goat with a horn, with a single horn, and
there's a lot of that going on.
Yeah. So, but most of us, when did the Ringling Brothers join forces with some of these other circuses? Is that one of the ways that they were able to build that empire?
Yeah. Let's see. I've got the date here somewhere. They actually bought out Barnum and Bailey at one time, and they ran the Barnum and Bailey circus and their own circus in competition with themselves around the country for several years. 1907, they purchased Barnum and Bailey for $410,000.
So that's why the Ringling Brothers get top billing over P.T. Barnum, because they bought them out.
And
perfect sense.
One of the things that I find kind of interesting is circus advertising. It is just really something else. One of their advertising gimmicks was to proclaim that they had the only giraffe left in the world. The rest of them were all dead. And if you wanted to see a giraffe, you must come there.
So it was a clean show, but still a few half-truths mixed in.
Other things that I found fascinating, when the Ringling Circus was on the road, they ran, it was almost as if a little city was moving from town to town, because they had their own post office, they had their own mess hall, they had their own veterinarian, they had their own blacksmith. They had all the makings of a village, and that's where the idea of Ringlingville came from, is that it was Ringlingville on the move. That was the Ringling Brothers town. And that whole thing just amazes me that they were able, I'm an old Army veteran, and the idea of that many people, 1,200 people moving from place to place day after day and moving tons of equipment, hundreds of animals every day was, well, I was in the transportation corps in the Army, and to move that much equipment every day, week after week, I mean, we in the Army could learn a lot from them.
And it seems like it was so successful for so many years, and a testament to the Ringling Brothers' ability to organize not only that many people, but that much equipment, and to manage the budgets and the food that they would have had to have, not only for the humans, but for the animals. And as you said, the care for it's like, it's an extraordinary story, and an extraordinary American success story, that within a single generation, an immigrant moves to the United States of America, and within a single generation, his family name is not only wealthy beyond what most people could imagine, but synonymous with something so important to American culture as the circus.
Yeah, it's something that, one of the reasons I wrote the book is I felt it important that, and I'm mostly a rural historian, that people in this country needed to know a perspective of what its entertainment was like, and how the circus was a major contributor to that. and how some of the circuses were negative contributors, and the Ringlings weren't. They were, from the very beginning to the end, honest people. The advertising was a bit stretched.
It seems like they started on that early with their mom's canary.
I just found this little piece on the giraffe. This was a 1901 circus ad. The only giraffe known to exist in the entire world, $20,000 was the price he cost. Not a million. Not a million times a million could buy another. He is the last, the only one, the single sole and lonely survivor of a once numerous race. I mean, what a bunch of malarkey.
And there had to be a zoo somewhere reading that profile going, wait a minute, we got a giraffe right there's the giraffe right there. I got 3 of them. Before we let you go, do you have a favorite circus act or circus element that you love the most?
I want to give a plug to Circus Museum in Baraboo, where all of this history, much of the history is there, and they replicate each summer a lot of the Ringling history.
Oh, wow.
With circus acts that they have. So, little Baraboo, Wisconsin.
And that's your favorite spot to go and check out circus acts?
That's right.
Yeah, I've always been a human cannonball fan. I love to watch somebody getting just shot straight across the arena. You know, I can remember sitting with my grandparents to this day, watching someone get launched across. Just thought it was, wow, how could you do that? And that's the legacy of the Ringlings right there. So. Well, Jerry, I can't thank you enough for doing this with us. And the book is Ringlingville USA, and it explores the lives and times of those 7 brothers who your title's a tongue twister on purpose, I would guess. The stupendous story of 7 siblings and their stunning circus success, which certainly sounds like it could have been one of the Ringlings headlines for their last giraffe ever.
That's my attempt at selling a giraffe.
That's author and historian Jerry Apps, his book, Ringlingville USA. It's a great read. It's available on Amazon and at other booksellers. And if you really want to get into the formation of the circus and those Masons who built it, definitely check out his book, Ringlingville USA. And according to news headlines, the greatest show on earth is back on the road, minus the animals, and may soon be coming to your town. And, for me, it's really fun to know that even under that circus tent where all the lights and the music and the sound and the craziness, Freemasons are really behind it all. I'm Maynard Edwards. Thanks for joining us here on the Tyler's Place podcast. Again, you got a question, a comment, an idea? Share it with us. Podcast@scottishrite.org. Until then, we'll catch you next time right here on the Tyler's Place.